Good morning. My name is Dan DeLong, and today we're putting together a video of the town of Turtle, what our neighborhood was like back then. And the theory comes, and many of you have always had the thought that visiting with a grandparent or a mother or father, and the many things that they talk about as how they were growing up or how the community was, and you're always having that thought, boy, it would be nice to get that on tape or video someday, because that's very valuable information and it's very interesting. And that's what brings us to today, is to see what the community was like, and we have a great group of individuals that have a lot of memories, and we'd like to start with that, and we start at the end of the table with Dick Post. So go ahead, Dick.
Dick Post Jr. and born in La Prairie Township in the old stone house just east of the railroad tracks in Tiffany on January 30th, 1935. We moved in over on the Kemmer farm that's on County J now, and lived in the home there where Orland Scholl and his wife live now. We were there about 3 years and moved away, come back here in Turtle Township in winter of 1947 on the old Freeman farm down here where Our Lady of the Assumption Church is now. We were there 38 years. I then married and been here in the township for 63 years. I was on the town board for 30 years and chairman for 28.
I'm John Kopp, and my mother and father, Marge and Andy, owned and operated the Shopier store from 1952 to 1989. I was born and raised in this area all my life. Little did I know that the store was going to become more or less an institution. I was always kind of in the background watching things happen.
My name's Chuck Wollslair. Mother and father were Frank and Lillian Wollslair. I was born in Turtle Township, about 2 miles out of Shopier, corner of Hart Mathers Road. We moved into Shopier in 1939. My father and mother came down here in 37, and the homestead is still on Butterfly Road across from the cemetery where a niece lives. And I guess I stayed right here where my roots are for all my life.
Name is Ed Gerth. I've lived here all my life since 1937, down on the same house on Lathers Road. My mother and dad bought that right when I was born, and I bought it from them in 1975. So I figure on staying there until the day I die. That's about it.
I'm Gene Haseman. I was born in the house I'm in now, down on the corner of J and Creek Road. And my daughter owns it now, and I'll probably be there for a while. That's about it, I guess.
I'm Ethel Maxworthy, and I wasn't born in Turtle. I was born in Clinton on Northrop Road, but my folks moved to Turtle in 1927. The farm that Ken Ludy lives on now, we lived there for until 1983, when Bob and I moved. We sold the farm to Ken, and I and Bob moved to Shopier Road, just a quarter of a mile out of Shopier, and I've been there now for 24 years.
Hi, I'm Frances Clark Rustad. I was born on Creek Road. My father built 3 homes here in Shopier, and I lived there. Then we lived across, let's see, who lives there now?
Siege.
The last home I lived in was Siege's, but I lived next to the Shopier Methodist Church for 21 years. And I lived across from my sister there. And my dad built 3 houses here, so. And I worked at the Shopier store for gosh, many years. And Chopier's always been in my heart, and it always will be. Thank you.
I'm Betty Clark Shepherd, and I've lived in Chopier since I was 5. Our family moved from Crawford County on the day I was 5 years old. I'll soon be 83, and I've lived here all my life. I went to school up here. My children went to school up here. My grandchildren went to school up here, and I guess Chopier's my home.
Well, the Turtle Town Hall, the original town hall burned many, many years ago. And then this building was built, dug with horses, the basement was all dug out with horses, and it was all put together there then. The hall's got a lot of history. It's too bad that it couldn't be preserved as a historical spot, I think. But anyway, it was a good building. We renovated it to the point years back, and I can't remember the year, with bathrooms inside, and it always had outside privies. And we had to make it fairly wheelchair accessible, or for people that had a hard time to get in. There was a lot of activities there. Best of my knowledge, there was one wedding there. Leonard Hoff from Beloit and his wife were married there, and I stood up with him there. I believe there was 1 or 2 other weddings there that when Mike Balyavinsky was the JP there, he performed the weddings. So it does have a lot of history. When the town of Turtle was originally formed or chartered or whatever the case might be, there was an old schoolhouse, and I have no recollection of the name of it, that sat on the corner of Lathers and Creek, where on Lester Oldenburg lives there now on that property, right up on that corner, and that's where the town of Turtle originally started. The schoolhouse was long gone years before I came. Stu Smith used to tell a little bit about it when he was a kid. He could remember foundation there. I have in the history that I can never find the name of it, but that's originally where it started. And then the people that were on the board then built the town hall. The old original town hall where the old Turtle Town Hall sits now. It's a shame that we don't have history on that or pictures, but there isn't anything I could ever find. And hopefully if somebody sees this, or ever has anything that would
Ed, you
be
live
nice
close
to.
by that intersection. You live close by that intersection. Do you have any
None of that.
information?
I know Stu Smith lived next door to us, and then one time that little house of Don Jones's was a store at one time, back years and years ago. And then Shuckhart lived down by the bridge. The big thing at Turtleville was the old Hodgson House, I guess they called it. The old run-down place. That had tunnels in the basement for slaves evidently running across the road into the little house on the corner there. That's the stories that went on anyhow.
You know, it's always curious to me why, of the 3 communities, Tiffany, Chopier, Turtleville, that Chopier grew more than the other 2, because Tiffany had the railroad, Turtleville had the stagecoaches way back when, but of course Chopier had Gerth Corporation, but
Not then.
I think not way back then.
It was probably the best route with the Chopier Road, the best road and route in the old days into Beloit, a city. That's what I'm thinking. My one reading the creek is right here, and straight shot into Beloit. I don't know for sure yet, John. Also, Turtleville, Dick is right on, in the first meetings, township meeting was at Turtleville. Mm-hmm. They were not in, where they were here, and there was a church there, store, and I believe there was a blacksmith that I've read.
In Turtleville?
Yeah.
Yep, there was. That was right down over the hill
Blacksmith,
from me,
too.
yep. Blacksmith shop.
They had it was a creamery, or maybe it was a blacksmith shop, and they started, and this is documented in history, that they started making moonshine there.
Yep.
And the feds came, and they had a pretty vicious shootout there.
At the Hudson House?
Yeah, in that area. See, there was buildings across the street where that new home is now, and they shot her out there.
He wasn't paying tax.
No,
Yeah,
that's why they got him.
I heard that,
That's how it got started.
that at the end of his life, that he played the fiddle in Janesville for spare change.
Could be.
That's
Very
what,
likely.
that's the story I've heard,
Yeah.
yeah.
Very likely.
That,
And then
but like I say, you know, Turtleville had the Hodson House and granary or whiskey distiller, or whatever that was.
They had a dam down there too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's right.
That's down about behind where Gary Howard's home is now.
Right.
Lynn
Yeah.
and Gary Howard's home.
But Shopier had, I don't know how that progressed in time, but they had the mill, you know, and the old stone house in Shopier, there was a
that was a blacksmith.
blacksmith, wagon factory,
They had a creamery there.
Masonic Lodge for a while.
Well, the old original Shopier store sat where the parking lot is in the tavern now.
Yeah, yeah,
And then he went across the street.
yeah.
Betty, you'd remember probably quite a bit about the old creamery. Some of that might have been there yet, wasn't it, when you were young?
Yeah, it was there by the
Yeah.
dam, you know.
Right.
And like you say, Briggs's ran the store. There was two stores.
Mhm. Yeah, there you
Briggs's
go.
and Haggard's ran the other
Yeah,
one.
and you see, Haggard came from the Warwick family.
Yeah.
He married into that Warwick family. That's how, and several different Warwicks had the store. And then Jim had married a Warwick,
Yeah.
and then that's how he ended up with being Haggard's store.
What was Joy Ramson, Ramquist, any related
No.
in that group? She was
No,
separate.
she came just before you people.
Yeah,
you
right.
folks
no,
said.
Yeah.
Well, Shopier originally was, Tiffany was Shopier Station.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Before Shopier was named. And
this was Waterloo.
yeah.
yeah, it was,
Yeah.
right, Waterloo, and then it was changed.
They changed that because there was another Waterloo, Wisconsin.
Yeah,
Right.
and there was a creamery there between the tracks and the store twice. The guy didn't, that's when they used to get pretty big fights over prices, and they burnt that creamery twice, and the second time they never rebuilt. And I can remember, what's that?
Where was this?
Right between the tracks and the store. That's where the creamery sat. See, there used to be a siding went down in there.
Oh,
And I can remember the kid, the pillars still sat there. And I don't know who took them out, you know, they cleaned that up. But them pillars that the creamery sat on still were there. And the tracks were split and the depot sat between them.
Depot's still there in the 50s yet.
Yeah,
Early 50s
yeah.
yet. I used to go up mill and work, you know, like, Christmas vacation school net, and work up feed mill net, and the old depot was there. It's too bad that didn't get saved too, you
Yeah.
know. It would have been nice to have it, but
Yeah.
things get tore down.
Yeah.
Chuck, you had mentioned how Shopier used to be Waterloo, and then it was changed to Shopier. Bob Nolan told me at one time, you were probably there, how Shopier got its name. Would one of you tell what Shopier stands for?
well, I always heard, and I might have heard it from Bob, I'm not really sure where I heard it first, but the Shopier is originated from the French language with some notation to limestone, and we do have pretty good limestone in this area. I would like somebody with some,
That's right, what you're talking about.
With,
French name is Shopier, and is, I think, in the limestone, that's where it came from. That's right in the history book about that, it tells you about that.
Because he said that with Shopier, that with the French or whatever, that the first or last part meant chalk, but the other part of the Shopier, that there was another significance with the name on how it came.
yeah, I'd like to have somebody knew some French that could give us a good explanation of that, 'cause I always wondered about that.
I thought one of you might know, okay.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Right where this building sits used to be the old Nobbage farm.
Yes.
And when they built the interstate down here, they came in and tested for the best limestone they could find to build that road. And this is where it was, right here. The pit up
Gravel.
here. Gravel, not limestone, gravel. Gravel, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, Johnny Mavich.
They were a pair, weren't they? John and Mike?
Bosco.
Don't leave Bosco.
Bosco, yeah, don't forget Bosco.
Yeah, they used to get awful drunk together. But, Well, the
They had
township
about a
bought the
couple-
farm then from them. And Stu Smith and Larry Ludy and myself was on the board when we bought this. And I have to tell this story so that it's made a matter of record. But we worked for about almost 2 years to get it bought. And I think every week of my life I came over to John, the house sat down in there where the fire station sits, about where that sign is now. And John made homemade wine. And I drank a lot of wine to get this place bought. Larry got to the point where he didn't want to come anymore. And Stu, he said that I could do it, I could handle it. He would come once in a while. Well, anyway, make a long story short, the farm was bought. And we bought it at a very reasonable price. And I'm thinking, I'm not sure anymore, but it seemed like it was $60-some thousand. We went to the Beloit State Bank at that time and to settle up, make the deal. And John and his wife came. And they had this little girl then. We done all the paperwork. Dave Collins was our attorney at that time, and John had an attorney. And John would take no check or anything. He came in with a brand new little briefcase, and John walked out of there with $60-some thousand in cash. The banker about died, but that was the way John wanted it, and that's the way he got it. But he had the cash in it when he walked out. And of course, our thinking, and originally why we bought the farm from him, was to start the landfill, which is up the road here now, which is no more. And good, bad, or indifferent, we were able to take care of ourselves for quite a few years. And so it's probably someday it'll maybe be a burden to the township. But that's what we did. That was the story with John. Nice guy, but drank a lot of wine.
I never forget when I was young, he threw me on the cat. It's the first time I drove a cat, and he said, "You can run that." I said, "No, I can't." No, he threw me right up there, and there I was throwing those levers around, driving that cat through the field. Whoa!
Hey, John, with the Shopier store, looking at the abstract of the farm that I live on, which is known as the old Cleanville farm up by the 5-arch bridge, and going back to where everybody's seen their original abstract, and Chamberlain was the name that was on that abstract, and at one time I saw in a history book where I thought I saw the name Chamberlain involved with the store in the very early years or whatever. Does anybody know what connection that might have been?
You know, I wish I had an abstract for the store, but I don't have one. For whatever reason, there wasn't one made available, you know. But I do have an abstract for the old stone house on the corner that is pretty interesting that goes back. It has some of the fondest, and I think Chamberlain is in that one too. I should have brought that along. It's a pretty interesting document.
Wasn't that the first house in Shopier?
No, I don't think so. I think, well, I can't say, I really can't say for sure, but they were all in that area. They're late 1840s, early 1850s, and I don't know which one was first.
That's where the voting took place for
Yeah.
Abraham Lincoln when he was...
During the Civil War, the stone house was a town hall,
Yep.
and the votes for Abe Lincoln were cast in that vote.
And then they made it into wheels and stagecoach?
Yeah, wagon factory.
Wagon factory and stagecoach. Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting, when I bought the place in 1975, I was aware that it was, at one time, it was Masonic Lodge. And then when I took the wallpaper off the south wall there, still on the wall was the Masonic symbol painted on that wall. Pretty interesting.
Did you buy it from your grandmother, May?
Right. My grandfather Roberts bought it in 1922, and it's been in the family for years and years and years. And one of the really good memories I'll always have is that my father and I, rebuilt that house, or else I don't know who else would have done it. It was just something we did together. He was the electrician and I was the plumber. You never saw two guys get in each other's way as much as...
You more so than Dad?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, we've had a lot of businesses over the years that have disappeared in the town of Turtle, but of course, we have to remember, if it wasn't for the town of Turtle and the town of Beloit, there would be no city of Beloit. And I always used to tell them that. they never like to hear that. But the town of Turtle went down into Brewster and all into that area, you know, and it went in as far as Prairie Avenue years ago. And the businesses that I know of that have lost over the years was, and I'm sure a lot of people know this, was Porter Station Creamery down below the old town hall. There was a railroad station, a stockyard, and a creamery there. They called it Porter Station. There is no recollection of history written that I could ever find. I wish we could. It's documented on the map. It goes, the Town of Turtle Plat Book of 1900, it shows it on there yet in 1917. And of course, Danny's Ranch, Highway 15, down in by the old Boynton farm, and Dan, your relatives were Boyntons.
Yeah, if you go into the Sundown Cafe in Clinton, there's a picture on the wall next to Ethel's beauty shop, and there's a little girl next to a guy on the stagecoach. And that was my grandmother, Florbell Boynton. Her dad was the mail carrier in that area.
In that area. Well, of course, that farm and three others that were in that area are all gone. Danny's Ranch is long gone. Shopier store, Tiffany's store. There was a general store in Lindale Place. I know you guys all remember that. I can't remember them people's name anymore. I don't know, it's some sort of a business now. The Walsh Brothers Warehouse, which is still there, but of course discontinued. And that was a place of business year-round. The Dogan Farm Dairy, Highlander Farm Dairy, down there by the railroad tracks, again by Porter Station, Homestead Dairy, Dogan Seed Farm, and of course the old creamery at Tiffany. There are tracks, the old creamery in Shopier by the mill, the blacksmith shop, and over there by the house. Then there was a blacksmith shop up right behind the old Methodist church, and there that's where the old clock laid for a good many years after it got ripped down by a team of horses.
That was the blacksmith shop too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where,
Yeah,
Mike
right-
Malloy burned up there in the ground.
Yeah.
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 In fact, Betty's brother built the house that stands there today, Buck.
Yeah, right, okay.
Where,
That was dug with a slip scoop. I remember watching Buck
Yeah,
do that.
terrible time. Limestone.
Limestone,
Right, yeah.
yeah. You know, we had 9 one-room schools at one time, and I can name some of them: Zilly, the Murray, the Kemmer School, Shopier, Hart. There was a school on County X by the old miner farm in Ethel. Maybe some of you people, I can't remember the name of that. It's a,
Hickory was one around there. Maple was up, wasn't where Leonard Beadle lived?
that's the one. Leonard Beadle, yeah,
I
Maple.
think that was Maple.
Yeah.
That was Maple.
And then there was a school down there by the old Boynton farm on I-90 and I-43. In fact, it sat just about in that interchange there
The
now.
Mosman family lived there later years, in the 50s.
Okay. The old stone school at Latherson Creek up there. And of course the Morgan School, that still goes. It's new now.
Zilly.
Yeah, Zilly School, got that.
Dick,
And
also I want to mention on X down there, be on the south side of the road, you had that little fruit stand like I think Daniels ran it one time years ago.
Daniels had that.
Yeah.
going into Boyd, yeah. Then there was a schoolhouse.
That was what we're.
I don't know how to even describe it now. It was long moved. It sat on Turtle Creek on the Black Hawk farm. If you go down through there and you cross the creek, like you're going to go over to Walmart now. Before you cross, if you go back, and Chuck knows the area, there was a lane that went down to a pasture there. And there was a schoolhouse that sat there. In later years, that school was moved up and built onto the house where I and my folks lived on the Black Hawk farm. That was that kitchen on there. And the bell went with it. And I have the bell. Years old, and it's on a pole in my yard, and that bell is many years old. It's a nice old bell. We also, that's the schools that I can recollect that, of course, disappeared. There was a golf course in the town of Turtle way back when, and that was over on the other side of the creek. The building is still there, that was the clubhouse. It's a big brick building, and then the golf course ran down along the creek. It was on both sides of the creek down there.
You had airstrip too, also, then Morgan Farm?
Yep.
Airstrip down there, right?
That down by Morgan School
Yeah,
behind
Morgan,
Safety.
yeah, the farm there was a red brick house there yet, that was the last thing that was tore down, that corner crib.
Talking about schools and the Zilly School, both my mother and Bob's mother were teachers at that school for a year or two, or, you know, something like that, before they were married, I know.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Was there a Zimmerman school? Zimmerman?
I don't remember Zimmerman.
No, Zilly is the only thing that I could come up with in the
Remember
maps.
the old play days?
Yeah.
I know neighbors, but what they call the one down there where Mosman lived on, where the interchange I-90 and 43 now.
Yeah,
That
I-
sat on the north side of the road, I
Yeah.
can remember going down to that school there, but when it was a home. But don't
I
remember
can't
the
tell you
name
what
of
the name
one
of
there.
that was.
You, Betty, remember the name of that one?
I don't.
And I know all the kids from those smaller schools, they all hated us.
We were a big school,
Oh, we were
2
big
rooms.
Did all of you, who all went to Schofield School, or what school? Where did everybody go to grade school?
Up here on the hill.
Okay, so you went to,
You never went there, Dick, you went to
First grade,
Hardin.
I went to the Hart School.
And my kids went there? Yeah, mine too, and my grandkids.
yeah.
My grandkids.
What graduating class were you from up to Schofield?
39.
1939? And you were, could you
She's
speak on
younger
the
than me.
Schofield School in regards to the twins you were talking about?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had 4 sets of twins, and they were all boys and girls. Chuck's got a brother and sister that were
Down and Donna.
Donna Wollslair.
Wiedemers, wasn't there a?
Walter
Wilma
Wilma.
Yeah.
Faye and Fran Clark.
Yeah,
Fran sitting right there, and Jim and Joanne Swanson.
Jim and Joanne Swanson, yeah.
Now, is that relation with Ed
His
Swanson?
oldest
Brother and
brother
sister.
Yeah.
His older
Yeah.
brother and sister?
Yeah, but we were state graded, see, and the other was just country schools, and Chopier was a state graded school.
So you turned out to be smarter then?
I don't,
We
I
had more
can't
fun.
say that.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun. We sure
Now-
did, in that school.
Now, the Chopier School, the two-story brick part, the lower 2 classrooms, do you recall when those lower 2 classrooms were added on?
They were built down when my kids went
Yeah,
to
it was
school.
in
They
the
were so
50s.
Yeah.
I'd say
Well,
50,
I can,
what, 7?
When the grandkids
Somewhere's in
went.
there.
I remember only one classroom in the bottom, and the teacher, of course, was Mrs. Temple, back a few years. But one classroom in the bottom in the cafeteria, and then upstairs, they had 2 classrooms, and there were 3 grades in each classroom, isn't it?
There was 4 grades when I went
When
there.
I went there.
4 grades. There were 4 in each room.
Yeah.
You had the lower
Yeah.
room, the upper room. You had
No kindergarten.
no kindergarten. You had 1 through 4 and 5 through 8 in the.
No
other side.
cafeteria them days.
No.
When I went to Chopier School, I was around the class, the Chopier kids were the only ones that actually went to all of the Clinton schools. You did kindergarten over at Bradford by Avalon, then you came and did 1st through 4th grade at Chopier. And Evelyn Propp, who Evelyn is Walt and Les Oldenburg's sister, she was the principal.
The first,
She only had a few mean days.
first extra rooms they started were in the back where the library used to be. That's where she first started. You know, the old 2 original ones, then in the back, that's where they first started extra room, putting in extra classes or rooms in there.
Upstairs or downstairs?
Upstairs.
Upstairs,
You
yeah,
know,
okay.
where the libraries were in the
Yeah,
back
yeah,
end of the
yeah,
school.
yeah, yeah.
That's where the first ones were. And then from there, you know, I was gone way before the basement and the additions on, but that was.
What was that teacher's name that used to smoke all the time there?
Elizabeth Lindemann.
Lindemann.
Yeah.
And Betty Temple, she was my 4th grade teacher.
My kids.
Another one, a local that was a teacher there one time was Denton Fry's wife, Kay Fry.
Yeah.
She was my 2nd grade teacher. They lived, in fact, where his son Bill lives now. Then they built one of the first new ranch homes down along Creek Road on the creek side, about across from Stu Smith farm.
And then Wiles bought it from them.
Yep.
When I went, my first 4 grades, my teacher's name was the same as mine, Miss Clark.
Were you related?
No,
And we had Miss Ferguson.
Miss Finley was a upper
Finley.
teacher.
It's amazing how history, years down the road, another individual in our community, when I went to elementary at Chilpier, George London was the bus driver.
Yeah.
And the way he kept the kids straight was he could drive the bus, and with those long arms, he'd put you in the front seat, and if you misbehaved, he'd reach back and grab your knee.
Couldn't do that today.
And you must have known that a lot because you were a bad boy.
People lied to you. Your daughter lied to you all the time.
No, I know. I can remember. Which one was it? Which Christopherson boy was it that, was it
Jay Christopherson was in our class.
Jay.
Jay and you, but wasn't it Rick that was?
Chris Christopherson.
Chris,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, we were the three good individuals of our class. We were the only three that wore bow ties to school. Stayed after school every day, cleaned the blackboard.
Remember seeing her walking by to school.
Like in my time going to school there, it was Jim Biedema. He would come to school maybe one day a week, maybe a month, I don't
Would this be
know.
Jim Senior, Jim?
Senior, yeah. And he spent more time in the cloakroom than he did in the schoolroom. Well, I didn't go to Chilpier School because we didn't have a school house in the district up at, it was a Kimmer supposed to have been. And there wasn't enough kids to have the school, so we had the first school bus that picked us up, and we went to Clinton to school. And Walter Waite drove the bus when.
Whereabouts did you live at that time?
Right where Kenny Ludy lives now.
Oh, so, okay.
And see,
Ethel, wasn't that school on the Kemmer farm there? Wasn't that called Kemmer or not?
I think it was, but
That's what we called it as a kid, I always knew it.
It was still there for a long time, and then finally,
We used to go in there, and the kids, we'd walk to Clinton, to go to the theater or something, on a Saturday or something, and then we'd like to stop in that old school, walk through the.
yeah, you could get into it.
Yeah, and then it finally
Yeah,
got tore down.
yeah.
I don't know what year it was, but
It was quite a while that it was sitting there. and
Yeah,
I can't remember either, but,
I remember.
But you never went to school there, huh?
you know, we were the first bunch that went to Clinton to school.
Oh, I see.
And so that had to be in 27 or 28, whatever it was, when, and Walter Waite drove the bus, and it probably was, I don't know, 10 kids or so. It was not a bus that looked like a bus now, but it was small. And then after he drove it and got rid of it, Henry Hahn had it for the rest of the years.
Henry Hahn used to stop Chilpier. He had that red, white, and blue bus-like colored, and then
Yeah.
you had to
It was
go
kind
down
of,
the
it was kind of a
store.
narrow thing, and you
Yeah.
sat facing one another, you
It
kids
was
did.
an old Ford.
And I was the first one picked up and the last one to get off at night always.
You stopped Chilpier store, that's where the kids that lived in Chilpier had to go down there and catch the bus, and that's where you got dropped off. And then your parents went over to the farm, that's who you paid for, wasn't like today, where it's all through tax money in school, that was privately owned, see? And then, so like, remember my dad happened to go pay Henry for the bus hauling the kids, yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, I remember once up here, the bigger boys were Bob Christopherson and Bill Tompkins and Wes Benedict and all. And our teacher was Miss Finley, a tiny little woman. And these bigger boys, they acted out something terrible. And I can remember her chasing them up and down the aisles, and she had a belt in her hand. She was trying to catch them. Of course, they'd jump over the rows of desks, and she couldn't do that. She had to go around again. I was thinking, boy, they sure couldn't do that today.
I've got one story about school bus I'll never forget. This is, of course, when we were going to Clinton schools, and the school bus had kind of went in the ditch a little bit in the winter weather. And Clarence Krebs was the bus driver at that time. Everybody probably remembers Clarence. And we were just on the edge of the ditch, not really in it, just couldn't get moving, And Ronnie Colwise, he says, "Come on, kids," and we all jumped in the back corner of the bus where it would pull it into the ditch, and that old bus just went boom right in the ditch. And I can still see Clarence just shaking his head. And then we had one of the kids, I don't remember who, went up to the next farm and got farmer with a tractor and pulled us out, and away we went. I can still see the look on Clarence's face. Gosh almighty.
The township has lost a lot of land, of course, as we all know, through development, which isn't all bad and it isn't all good, as far as I'm concerned. But the two biggest landowners in the town of Turtle in 1900 was the Morgan farm was the biggest. That was 1,400 acres. And they had, he specialized in Angus cattle, Shropshire, Berkshire hogs, and Birchen horses. And he'd import them and breed the stock here. And I'm sure a lot of you, I know, will remember the big barn across the road where, well, what's in there now? The old old plantation and all of them set now.
Brannigan Farm.
Brannigan Farm,
Bob
yep.
Brannigan.
Bob Brannigan ended up owning that. And of course, the main buildings were on the other side of the road. And Morgan's had a lot of money, and he produced them. But that barn was huge. It was huge over there. Then they had the dairy barn down closer to the creek, and of course, the main house was the manor. I don't know if that's still even there.
Yeah.
And they had their own power plant. There was a little dam down on the creek for years down there where they produced their own power. And of course, that's all township. Morgan always had horses and drove into town because they didn't have cars. And he got a Model T. And he had the Model T, and he paved concrete from the creek and the railroad there where the old overhead used to be coming out of Boyd on 15. I don't know what it was called then, but it was dirt. And he paved that with concrete out as far as, out in the area there where Max is and Menards and all of that. But he had a strip there so he could drive on concrete back and forth. Boy.
I remember that piece of cement there.
Yeah, I can still remember the concrete.
Yeah.
So a lot of history. And then, of course, the Latherses were the next biggest thing. And I got their names. I had to look them up because I forgot. They had 900 acres. There was William J., John W., J.W., and Charles Lathers. And they were big in sheep and grain farming as far as barley and wheat. It's gone now, but of course Porter Station, and if you are at the Old Town, Turtle Town Hall, and you're going to turn to go to Clinton, there was a dirt road for years and years that went up to what is Lathers Woods now. They owned that. And that's how they drove sheep and cattle down there to the station and loaded there at the stockyard. But them two were the biggest property owners in the town of Turtle in 1900. I also have the town chairman, and I got his picture here. The town chairman, where is he here? George H. Crosby. And there's two of the Latherses on there. Now, he lived where the airport is now. That was a farm there. And he's the first gentleman there with a beard. That's where he lived. And it's kind of interesting. I also have the Maxworthys here. John, and I don't know, I'm sure Ethel's got this. I got a picture of Charles P. Maxworthy's farm, 1916. And if you know where the Maxworthy Road is down there in the farm, you can give that to Ethel. There used to be a bridge down there. That road did go through there. And Bob Maxworthy he told me the story many times. He was a small boy. How old he would have been then, I don't know. Maybe 6 years old, had a pony. And one of the Lathers was town chairman then. And the abutment in that creek down there went bad on that bridge. And the 3 town board members came in their horse and buggies, and Bob rode down there on his pony and sat there and listened to him, and they decided to close that road. And so that was many, many years ago. It's kind of a shame
He used to tell that story.
that the road isn't open now. The abutment is still there. It's now tipped over, but it's still down there.
That would have come over about where Gunderson's place was. Wasn't
Yeah.
that about where it was to come out?
It came out on the state line road then.
Yeah.
And Bob has told that story quite often. So, it's
You know,
kinda
Susie's done a whole geology here, Howard, of all the Maxworthys, and those are names that she's way back. She's got them all back to that Thomas, and I guess he kind of disappeared, and they never quite got him found, but other than that, she's found all the rest of them. She's been pretty busy on that.
Yeah. And we all in the township, you always have to have unpleasantries, and there was 3 murders that I know of. And first one was in the late 1800s and 1900s, and it was over here on the Thusen farm on the Creek Road, where you come off of there at I-90 and you start down to, like you're going to the hospital. And the wife of the gentleman and the hired man had plotted against them. They killed him, got in a horse and buggy and drove to Janesville, and the next day they were getting on the train to leave the country, and police cops got them up there. They were arrested and they were both put into jail. The Butterfly Club, that was never solved. That was in the early 20s. They never solved that. That was a shotgun killing there. Thought maybe it might have been out of Chicago, but that murder was never resolved. Never anyone there. And of course, the last one that I know was over here on the Coots farm. And of course, they found a couple bodies, I guess, up at Naughty But Nice. So it's always something that takes the pleasure out of history in the town of Turtle.
You mentioned the Butterfly.
Yeah.
Where the Butterfly Club is now?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was a small truck
That was a
stop
small
many
place.
years ago.
Just a small one.
Yeah, just a little building, and it started off, you know.
When did the Butterfly Club start up? Do you remember?
Oh, I couldn't tell you.
But it's always been called the Butterfly Club?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Butterfly Road.
Butterfly Road, Butterfly Club, and then of course it burnt, pretty much burnt down, you know.
Right.
70s,
Somebody
75.
rebuilt and started it over.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's a lot of history there. It's been there lots and lots of years.
Mr. Gerth, over on Creek Road, one time I was talking with you and you were telling me, because Chaupier is always associated with a lot of the rural residential type homes going from Chaupier heading towards the interstate. When did that build up?
Creek Road?
Yeah, when did that, I know it was that way in the 70s, I'm just curious when the...
It started, Stu Smith started selling off lots there in about late 1950s is when they started building, all the way from Lathers down to the old Luden farm. That's where Stu bought that, I think, from Luden's. Now, there wasn't too many houses there. There was the Luden farm, the one house, Stu Smith's old barn. Remember people talking about that? Set on the south side of the road, and it about fell down for years. And finally, I don't know what happened to it. I guess the wind took it or something. But there was only about 6, 7 houses on Creek Road between Lathers and X. And the same way with everything else around here, you know. I mean, Lathers Road between Creek and Chaupier, there was 1, 2, 3, 4 houses. Now it's all built up. And the subdivision there across the creek from me, where
Circlewood?
Circlewood is, yeah.
When was Circlewood developed? Do you remember when
That was, when, Chuck? 60s?
Yeah, that laid for a long time, and then finally it took
I
off.
picked corn in there with Leroy Mathewson, I'm gonna say in about 62, 3, right in through there. I won't forget it, because I ran a stone into his combi. Bent the cylinder.
Well, the Turtleville Cemetery, and you mentioned the home where the tunnels were and that. In the Turtleville area, what else was in that area that you can recall in the Turtleville area?
Well, there was a guy there that lived next to where Kikefer lives now. Lived next door there. What the heck was his name? The cops used to chase him home by our house all the time.
Chesney. Don Bowers?
Don Bowers, that's the guy.
Yeah.
George Bowers' his dad, and then Ernie and Don were the sons.
Cops used to chase him by my house. They were going like hell,
Yeah.
chasing him home. Bowers, and then on the corner was, heck, who lived there? Hans lived there back when I went to school in the 40s. Roy Hahn. And then after that, Freymark.
Now Kurt lived on the corner, he used to help my dad do.
Yeah, Freymark. Yeah.
Okay.
And then Stu Smith. That was, then Les Oldenburg bought that from him.
You had Ross Keller on this side of Stu Smith to the east there.
Yeah.
He owned both sides of the road too. We used to
Yeah.
go down there in toboggan down back on the
On that hill there.
the creek
Yeah.
there, yeah.
Yeah.
Sled and toboggan down there.
Yeah, Seversons used to live
Good
there.
spot.
They used to run the mill in Tiffany years
Yeah.
and years ago.
Severson.
Seversons.
Everett Severson.
Everett.
I think they built them 2 houses there on Creek Road.
And
Them
on
2
the
little
south-
ones on the south side.
On the south side of Creek Road, when I was a kid, there was only 6 houses
Yeah.
on the south side of Creek Road.
Yeah.
Your dad built the old Naylor house, didn't he?
Yeah, where Williams's used
Yeah.
to live, the last one, and then he built one
Naylor,
across
that's
the
the
street
woman with
from
the
where I
dolls?
live.
With Jerry Brown then.
Yeah,
Telling him.
and then next door to me, he built that house.
Severson also lived going to Tiffany, just around the curve there.
Yeah.
That, before they left here, it was the last place when they had
Yeah,
the mill.
but they used to have the farm there, and
The
Wyndon's
He had two
used
girls
to live there,
over in school.
where Stu
They
Smith's
were,
did.
Fran and Louise.
What was the name of the woman that lived there on Creek Road that had all the antique dolls?
On Creek Road?
Lived right next to, west of where my son lives.
Wasn't Bev Williams, was it?
No.
Did she have any-
Well, Williams has lived there at one time.
Yeah,
Before that,
uh,
she had a bunch of antique dolls.
Oh, he's
Yeah, I
talking
know who you're
about, but I
talking about
can't
too, but
remember
I
her
can't.
name. I think those are the people that
Bought it from Dad.
bought the place for my dad.
Oh,
What was her name?
They don't think they ever had any children.
I know, my mother and her used to go to sales all the time and pick up antique dolls, and she had a heck of a collection of antique dolls.
I
And
can't,
Archie
I know the
Wayne
name
used
too,
to
and I can't
live,
remember.
where his son Bill
And
lives.
I'll think of it.
Arch Wayne used to live where
What
Bill
was the
does.
guy's name that, I think the house built, there was always a cement foundation on Creek Road down there for years and years.
How far did you move to?
Down past where the gas line runs now,
Yeah.
Which way, east or west?
it would be east of there.
East of there.
Cement Foundation.
It'd be
Used to live in
down
there,
just,
No, I owned a place here for a while.
Was Naylor that her name? Was that
Gene,
lady's
you
name
had spoke to
Naylor?
me a
Yeah, no.
couple of times
Naylor's
on
lived where we used to live.
Naylor.
mowing the
Yeah.
grass, and Ed
That's
Gerth
who it
did
was.
too.
They had
at
the dog, they had the
Shakespeare
dog.
Park.
I bet that's who it was.
Yeah, because they're the
Go
ones.
back in history as far as where the Shakespeare Park comes in with you.
well, Shakespeare Park came in when, just for what I know, came in when bridge, the old iron bridge
Right.
was taken out, and they put in the new bridge that's there now.
So on County J,
Yeah, on County
that
J.
used to be an iron bridge similar to the Lathers Road and the Smith Road.
53, 1953.
1953, that bridge.
They didn't dedicate it till 55, but yeah, it's
Something like that.
It got burned up one night.
The metal bridge did?
The old bridge did,
A
yeah.
lot of things happened on that old bridge, especially Halloween.
Was it named Meach Bridge? Is that what it's
Yeah.
called now?
Yeah.
I think.
2 truckloads of corn shocks and 10 gallons of gasoline. Man, it made a heck of a fire.
I can remember when we used to, when it was owned by the park was owned by the community, the only way the grass got cut was with, the kids got mom and dad's lawnmower, and we all went down there, maybe a dozen kids, and we could mow the grass, and then we could play ball, you know. And
That's where most of the trees, Boy Scouts and local kids and his dad, Andy, done a lot of work down there, Art Kiesling and a bunch of his kids would go down, we planted, and someone one year, I think, set them on fire because it was in the winter skating time and a lot of them pines burnt.
I can remember carrying water to water those trees. Dad was always, when you put those pine trees in, you cup the base and you put water in them every day, Fred and I, my brother Fred and I would bucket water out of the creek and run up there and water those trees. I built
3 fireplaces down there. I remember that. And they got, flood took them out, didn't it?
Well, some of them got damaged a little
Oh,
bit, but
deteriorated.
I think that one year all the ice that came up through there took them out.
I can remember standing on that bridge and those big ice cakes come down and hit the bridge and just shake it, years ago. That hasn't happened lately, of course. Of course, it'll never happen again.
Don Needham worked on that pavilion. They used to up on Needham Road, that family, Howard Needham's son, who moved away to California. He'd done the brickwork and concrete work on the pavilion. I think it was 1957.
Yeah, that's been there a long time.
Yeah, quite a while.
When the county decided to redo that parking lot, it was just gonna be a little scroungy parking lot. And I got, Tom Couts was the park commissioner and I was on the board. I got a hold of him and said, you can't do that, there's too many people in there. No, he said, we don't want to encourage people to come in here. Well, anyway, make a long story short, the town of Turtle, we used our loader and all the gravel and the fill for that whole parking area in there was taken out up here and donated down there to, so that we had a decent parking lot. And it is a decent spot.
What year was that? You figure?
Oh, boy.
When they done what, Dick?
When the county paved the parking lot in there?
Yeah.
I can't tell you, it had to have been, it was in the 70s. Early, probably mid-70s probably, I don't remember. Early
Because I
70s.
can remember in the early 70s where the big high outfield fences right now, that used to be just telephone poles.
Yeah.
Would be the outfield for the ball diamond. So. And down in Chopier now, every year for the last 20 to 40 that I can remember is every 4th of July is a ball tournament down there. And there's all the waiting list to get in there because it's one of the last softball diamonds in the area where you got the grass infield and then the big high fence at the outfield and stuff like that. So
When they built the bridge in 53, there was an island from the dam, it stopped down behind the tavern. And the water used to come over into the park a little more. It came off and it went under the mill, through the mill racing and down under the mill. And so that it went on between the bank behind the new tavern that's there now. And water ran down through there and also over on the park side, water came around and the island ended right about between where the old Reese home is, where Judy is now, Ogilvy, and the new tavern. That island ended about there. And then the other side of the bridge going downstream, about where the Craw home was, the island started just down past that, about the end of Water Street, and that stopped down about where Marion Turner lives, back there. And they took both them out, straightened that all out through there, when they, so the creek ran straight through when they built the bridge.
I remember that one.
Remember, we used to drive our cars up and down the creek.
Yeah.
Duke Woodman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Matt wasn't that. Just
They had, remember the dance on the bridge, when they opened that new
Yeah.
bridge up?
Yes.
They had a dance on the bridge.
That
Then
was,
they
drive
got-
the
that
car.
was the first 4th of July.
That was the first 4th of
The first
July.
4th of July.
And what year was
Because,
that, would you predict that?
55.
1955.
That's when they dedicated the bridge. There's a plaque right on the bridge.
Okay, and that's the year that you had talked about
Yeah,
remembering mowing the lawn.
yeah,
Getting
we
ready
mowed,
for
we
the
mowed
4th of
with
July.
push mowers, a bunch of the kids down there and stuff, some of them that's moved away. And
I think I had a rider. My dad bought a new rider for
You've
that.
come from
I
a
had a
wealthy
push.
family, the rest of us.
Still bragging about that.
I remember
Yeah.
the old lady that donated the land for the park.
Yeah,
I just
I just sweet.
And the Dole brothers, she was real friendly with Dole brothers.
I remember one day when your dad Willie and my dad and Chuck Fensky and I don't know who all else were down there dragging it flat, and somebody said, "Gosh, we should have some more weight on that drag." And pretty soon my dad was running across the field and he jumped on that drag to have some extra weight in it. And lo and behold, his billfold came out of his pocket, and that drag went over that billfold, and there was money flying all over. Dad carried a lot of money on him because he ran the store. And if I talk to Fred Clens, I think They got all but 20 bucks of it, and there was about $600 in that billfold.
Gene, you mentioned at the Shopier Park, Sweet Allen Park, that your dad and you were involved. You talked about putting the water bubbler. There's a famous water bubbler by the shelter in there.
No, I don't remember doing anything with that. I know when we raised money from the 4th of July stuff to put the swing sets in that are down there now. They bought that out of there. And they, I know Andy Kopp, my dad, Stu Walker, did some work on the pavilion that's down there with laying some of the cornerstones and stuff like that. But I think, didn't they have to go rebuild some of that on that one flood?
I think so.
Yeah,
The flood of '73.
yeah. Yeah, that one there, I was living on the hill
Was the roof.
on Butterfly Road, and I had to jump a county truck to get across the bridge. It was hairy going across because the county truck was empty in it. The water was pushing it like that across the bridge. Coming back, they were loaded.
I remember spending that day putting sandbags in the mill so the water didn't go through the old mill race, wash the mill away. That's where I spent my time that day. But I've got some 8mm footage of that. My mother had her camera out, and I've got it over there now. If I can get it fixed up on a CD, I'll do that. Pretty interesting stuff.
Betty mentioned Dole brothers, Frank and Bob Dole.
Yeah.
They lived right up here going towards Tiffany, where I think Les Oldenburg Jr. lives there now. That was the Dole farm.
Marge Bus.
Marge Bus had that.
Yeah,
for a long time.
but Les Oldenburg's got it now.
Yeah.
That's the new house.
That's the new house.
They lived in the old two-story White House, the Dole brothers.
Yeah, I know where they live, that's why I'm probably, I thought Les bought that.
No.
By the old one, the little one next door, Bob Townsend's? Oh, that's one he's in, okay. But, no, I worked in that Dole house there when Marge Bus bought it, I helped, when she remodeled that.
Up to the,
I buried, dug the grave for Frank Dole.
Frank Dole.
Dug his grave.
Well, Chuck, to bring up the cemetery, how you worked and took care of it, and what years did you work up at the Shopier Cemetery and
Oh,
your
gosh,
brothers dug the graves?
Growing up right across from there, and there was a guy by the name of Jim Haseman, would be related to Gene here.
Yeah, that was my own.
They lived in the old stone house downstairs that John's family owned, Jim and Minnie. And they took care of the cemetery, and Jim had an arm that wasn't very good. He'd had a slight stroke or something. My brother Bob dug graves for him too, helped him, and then I did for years. And then I took care of it myself some years. So there's quite a few up there that I dug by hand. Bob done quite a few private. I used to dig them and cover them up, $5 a grave.
And what year was that?
Oh, in the 40s and 50s, late 40s up into the 50s, and even into the early 60s.
Are you that old?
Just curious,
I worked hard when I was young.
how long did it take to dig a grave?
Yeah, most of the day, depends how fast you want to go, how hard, how fast you wanted to go.
How many trips you made down to Andy's store to get a pot?
That was it, at them days, it was a store. No beer? No beer then, no. But one week, I think it was in July of '53, I dug 3 graves. They're within just a week, 3 of them that had passed on. And then mowed it all by hand, same way it was all pushed more.
How much did you get for that?
It wasn't too much, but anything looked good. But, if it was all sideline work, that you're doing for.
Tax-free.
Well, you mentioned that there was no tavern to run down to.
The tavern was there, I just wasn't old enough.
What year would somebody like to talk on the tavern? Because it used to be in a different spot, and what family started the Shopier Tavern? And
Reese.
Reese's brought it back in 1933 after Prohibition.
It was an old, pretty similar to the store. 2-story with they had a dance floor up top and fights out back. It was a great place.
used to be a store too.
And then the
Yeah,
lot,
yeah, right.
the lot between the old tavern, which ran right down along the drive, goes down to the mill, between there and the house across from the store belonged to Chicago family. And Wenzel, Marlon Wenzel bought the business of the old tavern in 57, and then in 61, he built a new tavern. You know, he had bought the lot and the house from the people out of Chicago, and then he built that new tavern in at that time, and he ended up, Lyons owned the tavern, and he ended up buying the building from Lyons and then tore it down to make, you know, in the parking lot, so.
Yeah, then after Wenzel, his daughter Ruth Ann and Tom.
You know, they were just running for, actually for him.
For him, yeah. And then Jerry Lee and now the
Yeah.
present guy.
Jerry Lee
Oh, there was
Woolslair
somebody else.
purchased it in the 1990s.
I would say late 80s.
Yeah,
Late
late
80s,
80s,
yeah.
early 90s.
80s,
There was one other guy in there for just a short time.
Mario Borden,
Borden,
had it for about a year.
Yeah. Didn't run it very long and got out of it.
And then Dan Haynes and his wife Pam purchased
Yeah.
it from Jerry Lee Woolslair
Yeah.
and their family, and then they still own the bar, but Patsy and Nita run the managers of the bar now.
And Pam was a Tuttle. Pam Tuttle, she was.
Dan Haynes' wife is
Pam, yeah.
is a Tuttle.
Yeah, her dad and my husband were coon hunters.
There's a family that was,
Bill.
you look at
Bill,
history,
yeah.
has been here a long time too, as the Tuttles. way back.
There's some good stories about coon hunting with Bill Shepard and
Oh, yeah. Wendy Wentman?
Wendy.
Wendy
And
Wentland
Bill Tuttle.
and Howard, what was Howard's first name? Vaughn's dad.
Howard Johnson.
Johnson?
Yeah, or Johnson, Howard Johnson, yeah.
He
I
went
never
one
knew-
time.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I never knew Howard.
They made him carry the coon, and that was enough for him.
Yeah, I remember they came back with some, that's right, he says, gosh, I can't hardly lift that bag, it was so heavy.
You know, we'll go from church, or from taverns to churches here. When we were talking about the Doles, that family was also strong into the Con Church on the hill. You got the Con Church up there on Church Street, up the top, the corner of Bus and Church Street. And then you've got the Methodist, which has been closed for several years now, down on J there. But I know the Doles, because I go to Con Church up there, and the Doles are pretty strong in that church when you read about it. In fact, I run into a stone which they've got on display up there now. It's kind of like a grave marker and made out of granite like, and it's got his name on there, Frank Dole, and dedicated to him, all the years that he was at church, and that it was way back under the ground basement. And so that I see they put it on display here the last few years now, so when I dug that out. And the bell in the Methodist church is the first original bell that came out of the Con Church on the hill. The Con Church was built first, and then the Methodist church behind, 1850 on the Con, and I think 55 or 4 or 5, something like that, was the Methodist church.
Who donated that cross that sits on the con church?
Howard Johnson for his wife.
That was Howard Johnson, okay.
Vaughn's and Rex's mother, Vaughn's mother would be,
The Johnsons lived up on Needham Road, Howard Johnson did.
well, yeah, he did on Lincoln for a while, yeah.
Yeah.
And his son Vaughn Johnson has the cattle company farm at the intersection of Needham Road and Butterfield.
You're right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
See, Mike Bumstead lived there back in the 40s, and Herbie Hahn built that house and barn there, who used to live neighbors to me on Petter Road there.
Herbie and Nan?
They bought bucks off. Yeah.
Herbie and Ann.
They were a couple quarters.
Well, you went from the church, from the tavern to the churches,
Tavern to the church.
and we're up on top of the hill, and did any of you work at Gerth Corporation, or, I know Walt Gerth was a friend of my dad's, and he's come with the same.
I know my dad worked for Walt when he first got going, and
And about what year was that, roughly?
gosh, I was awful young.
40s.
Well,
You weren't born yet.
I wasn't born yet, that's true. But I can remember them putting up a basketball hoop in the shop there. So
He had a
so the
chicken
kids could
farm up
play.
there first.
That's
Yeah,
first.
Yeah, chicken farm
Chicken
first,
farm.
way back when, yeah.
Then chickens, stoves.
My dad
we
worked
done-
up there then,
He
when I was in the process.
rebuilt stoves and made lime spreaders for spread lime on the
Still
field.
does.
In fact, I've still, no, they don't make them.
They don't make them anymore?
They don't make it.
It ended up being salt spreaders that went to, sold in the Central Engineering in Milwaukee.
Big sprinklers.
I grew up right next to there, and Walt moved there in the 20s, and I'm gonna say, we went from the chickens to, he had stoves, then he went into the foundry business. He had an iron and brass foundry there. And then he eventually turned it into, the foundry closed in 52. Then he went into machine more, gearboxes, got in the gearbox business, and from there on, that's, the business really thrived then. One of the first customers he had that really got him going good was Cunningham out of La Crosse, made one of the first hay crimpers, and he built the gearbox for that. And we'd hear this old GMC diesel semi-tractor come up the hill, and I and a couple of my brothers run over. We load all them gearboxes by hand on that truck, they had flatbed, and load them up. That was one of his first big customers that really done good for him. My dad ran a brass foundry over there for years. Another one that ran that was Hank Van Zandt. Well, my dad worked there since 37.
Yeah.
There was not a Wollslair that wasn't working there from 1937 until my brother left 3 years ago and moved to Arizona. He was the last one.
Which brother was that?
Kenny. Kenny left and went to Arizona, but from 1937 until which would have been, 2004, there was someone there out of the family always worked there.
Who was the other guy that used to live in Tiffany that?
Red Nichols,
Nichols.
Iron Pump. I was
Yeah.
gonna bring that up, thanks, Al.
That name.
Yeah, he ran there, yeah, he was with Walt longer than anyone, really.
Yes, I think he did.
Yeah,
He was
he-
one of the
Yeah.
first 2 or 3
Yeah,
or
he was there
or
before
something,
my
wasn't he?
dad even.
Yeah.
He used to talk about, when he came here, Nichols worked on, when they redone the old railroad bridge in Tiffany. Well, I don't know if they tucked in, they done some work on that bridge in the 20s, and he worked on it.
I know in the late 40s, my husband used to take castings and stuff. He worked at Yates's, so he'd take castings and stuff for Walt haul them down to
Yeah.
Yates's. It was in the late 40s.
Walt worked at Yates American himself one time. Yeah.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, he had a brother, Jack, too, that used to live here.
Yeah, I
Did you know him,
remember
Jack? He did
You
live
lived
in the
in that
old
little-
Used to
butcher
live in
shop
that
back
little
there, didn't he?
building there by where...
Slaughter, what do they call it,
Burns
butcher
was.
shop or
Yeah.
slaughterhouse or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, the one that's tore down by
Yeah,
Burns.
yeah.
Dave and Paul McClellan
Was
was
he
the
the
last ones
last
to live there, that little place, that.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, was he Jack Gerth, was he the last one to live in that little butcher shop? Or
Dave and Paul McClellan.
they lived there?
They're, Bill McClellan, their dad owned a big white house where
Yeah.
Burns is.
Well, when I was a kid, there was a family in there that had a girl about my age. And she used to come over to the house and Ma'd babysit.
Well, didn't John Eisenhuth live there for a while?
I don't remember Eisenhower.
But that was the only, I don't remember what their name was.
I think-
But I know they had a girl that was probably my sister's age.
I think
They
John
would come over.
Eisenhuth lived there for a short time until he
Yeah.
built the house in Tiffany.
That could be, I don't know.
They rented the north side of that out. Scoop and Joe Reese
No, she lived in
in the
that,
little house.
in a little house where the
Yeah.
stone or cement foundation
Yeah.
was there for so many years.
But I know the big house, they rented that side out. Remember Scoop and Joe lived there until they bought Van Ness's across the road, that little house there, when they built a new one.
They built that.
Yeah, my son used to live there too.
School.
One time.
No, not that little house.
They didn't?
No, that was
No,
Van Ness's home.
That was a parsonage, was a congregational parsonage.
That scoop they
Was
used
it?
to work in the tavern?
Methodist
Yeah.
parsonage.
Yeah.
I thought the Methodist parsonage was across the road from the church.
No,
It wasn't?
that was the Methodist.
It's
the
where
one-
Burnses live now.
Yeah,
Okay,
And the one
okay,
up
then
on-
maybe they were renting that out one time or something to
yeah,
them.
Briggs used to live there
The
many
big
years ago.
house, yeah.
Briggs.
Well,
Briggs,
my
yeah,
grandmother
Briggs.
lived in the apartment there for a while, and McCollins owned it then, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Back in
McCollins
the-
owned it for a long time.
Gosh,
40s.
Yeah, they had a place
well,
in,
even after that.
they had a
my
place in
grandmother came.
California too, Santa Ana, California, and they sometimes go out there and live a few years, remember, and come back.
Who was that?
Bill McClellan.
Oh, yeah. Well, they lived across from the school too.
Yeah.
at one
Yeah.
time.
Years ago.
Yeah.
I think the kids were all more younger then.
Family by the name of Haseman lived there too. one
Yeah.
time. Haseman family.
Back in my day, Mrs. Bikerights lived
Like Chris.
Right?
widow lady Bikerights. And up where Bobby, what you call it?
Reed.
Bobby Reed lives, there was an old widow lady named Mrs. Buck.
Yeah.
And down where Lil Swigler used to live was an old widow lady named Mrs. Wheeler.
Yeah.
And when I was a kid, that's what we did in our spare time when we were, 12, 11, 12. We'd go visit all those old ladies all the
Yeah.
time.
And
And
then
Mrs.
Who lives in them homes now, where you're speaking of?
Huh?
The homes that she's talking about?
Well, it's,
What, some of them houses, someone just moved in later years, I don't know, but who lived there back when I was a kid, I could tell you, but not today.
Well, who lived across from that, right, where Lil lived? Who lived in that house across the street?
can't think of their name right now, but that was an old couple that lived there.
Well, when you're speaking of Gerth Corporation, Walt Gerth, I don't know if Ethel has mentioned, but the home you live in right now.
Yeah.
Is
Was
a-
his daughter's house.
Yeah, he built
Was
that
it
for his
daughter's
daughters.
And Bill McCollum, I think, put the fireplace in at home there. I think he was a builder, and that's what he,
Orrin Hagen built the house.
did he?
Yeah.
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 I
Well,
worked
well,
for
then
Gerth then.
Bill put the fireplace in at home. It was something that he did.
1959 that was built. Yeah. We planted all them trees you got in the back here in the corner.
Oh, did those
Sent
evergreens
us
that
down
are
from the
way up
shop
to the...
to plant them trees, yeah. Corner of pine trees. Janet died about 75 or 6, either 75 or 6,
Someplace in there, yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
Because it was right close to my centennial year
Mm-hmm.
when that happened there with her.
I think probably 76.
A bit of interest. Go down through and tell your first car that you had. What kind of car was your first car? And I'm kind of interested because I know John Kopp in the 60s was kind of known for the fast cars.
Well, I think more, don't put it all on my shoulders. There are a few of us that had some fast cars around here, yeah.
Ed had the rocket.
Yeah. He was always in trouble.
Yeah.
Cars give me trouble, yeah.
I had a 39 Chevy, the first one, and it was a real nice looking car and everything. Bought that for $85, but that wasn't good enough. I seen this nice 50 Mercury, so I ended up getting a hold of that, and the rest is a lot of them. Since then, there was a lot of different automobiles, but them two I remember well, and one of my favorite ones is when after I got the service, I bought a 57 Chevy, nice black two-door hardtop, and that was probably the nicest car that I ever had for them days, and
Sure. Dick, what was your first car?
1929 Ford Model A.
Did you watch it come off the line?
No, it was pretty well used when I got it, but that was the first car I ever had. I think I had more fun with that than I had with anything else. But, yeah, first one
Somebody don't want to give up.
I remember you with that. Bake and Mel and all these guys.
ever. Yeah, we used to have a lot of fun with it.
The two areas that I think are significant with the town would be the clock, if there's history about the clock, or when the clock was moved from the center of the street, and then also the railroad bridge and the railroad.
Well, a lot of history on the clock. It used to set in an intersection, of course.
Got knocked down by a team of horses.
Team of horses
Yeah.
ran away and took the clock down, and it laid in the blacksmith shop up there.
Roughly what year was that? Would you guess?
Do you know the year? I don't know the year.
I don't,
Betty,
I've got the year, but I couldn't tell you where
Betty,
it
do you remember that? Because Scoop Reese, whose dad owned the tavern, and, brought, after Prohibition Day, started the tavern up, told me he was in 3rd grade and that clock got knocked down, and they let him out of school when the horses came down the team and, and straddled it and knocked it over, and let him out of school, he said, to go down there and see that. That's
Well,
the story
I
he
would
told
like,
me.
5 years old, I think. And it was there then. It got knocked down after, because I can remember it being there.
Yeah.
It was there when my folks first moved, you know, there, and for years, but I can't remember either, but I do know that when Bob was young, that he was one that got in an accident with John McGowan there at the thing. I can't remember how, I suppose he was driving, so I don't know, it's before I knew him, but.
And it was 1930 when I was 5 years old, so.
I always found it kind of interesting that, you know, for years and years and years and years and years, Jim Craw took care of that clock. And you could always depend on the time of the clock being right. I mean, it was always right. And after Jim died, nobody could get it to run anymore. It's pretty.
He had the knack for
He
it.
had the knack for it. He never passed it on.
Lester
Put the
Butler,
new stuff in.
World War I is why it was dedicated, I think, Lester. And then he had a brother and sister, Lyman Llewellyn, that lived, if you go up Butterfly Road on top of the hill, where the apartment house is, right at the end of Church Street there. I don't know if anyone's got a picture of that house. I wished I had one myself. You know, it was actually looked like a nice big home, but the wood was so bare on that thing, and it looked kind of like a haunted house
Yeah,
when
it
you drive
did.
by.
And he used to do, Lyman used to do day work for, I know, for my dad and
Yeah.
stuff like, you know, $5 a day was what they got back.
I can always picture him, he'd walk, he'd use a lath for a cane, and he chewed Stockholm snooze, with a yellow label on the can. And he'd come down to the store a lot when we were little kids, you know, and you had the old bread boxes out in front, and they had metal, sheet metal over top of them. They'd come early in the morning and put the bread in them there, you know, before the store was open. And you told him Shopier wasn't on the map, he'd get mad, he'd come at you with that laugh. And I still got a scar on the top of my left foot. He'd come at me one time, I had my feet up, kind of folded up under me, barefooted, and I leaped off of there quick, you know, before he could get at me, and I nicked it on a piece of that tin, and just cut enough to draw blood on it. But
It's funny how many people remember those bread boxes.
Oh,
Sit up, brothers.
yeah.
Everybody remembers.
Oh, yeah.
That's amazing.
But both of them ended up, I think, going up when the county farm was still going. Lyman and Llewellyn both, I believe, ended up there. 'Cause I remember I dug the grave for one of them too. I think it was Llewellyn,
Oh, yeah.
the sister.
I remember Lyman, the boys used to tease him so bad.
Oh, yeah.
Because he stuttered.
Yeah, he was different
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. And they'd tease him and then they'd run because he'd chase them.
Well,
Yeah.
he couldn't go very fast.
Yeah.
I remember what a beautiful place this used to be when all the trees were along the
Oh,
side
yeah.
of the road.
Yeah.
Any way
Down
you came in
Shopier
here, it
Road.
was just like a arch.
Yeah.
All the big trees.
That was our
shaped
elms we lost
Up and
them.
down
What was,
the road.
when was that? That was in the
Early
50s?
60s.
Early
Yeah,
60s, okay.
all the elm disease came.
Pirate Road, Shopier Road.
Yep.
It
Oh,
all
down there,
just-
when you turn the corner there to look, to come on to J by the bridge there, just a tunnel all the way to
Yeah,
the
it
bridge.
was.
Sure, yep.
They came together right
pretty,
over
yeah.
the road.
And again, down by the Henning Farm, you drive down through there before you get to Lou Bar's corners, that, the maples and, or elms on both sides, just like a tunnel through there, beautiful. And it's right through Shopier, from the store to the tavern, both sides of the
Yeah.
road there, the same thing.
Same thing. Trees up, all up and down each side of the road.
It was pretty nice, yeah.
Yep.
Well, the limestone 5-arch bridge, that was built in around 1865, roughly.
In the 60s, I'm not really sure exactly what.
Right in there.
60s.
And I know that the home that I live in was the Klingbill farm, and Carl and Ed Klingbill.
Yeah.
And they used to tell us kids growing up that two of the foremen, when that 5-arch stone bridge was built, rented a bedroom in that home. So we've never figured out how old the home is where I live, but we know that it was pre the 5-arch bridge. So, and the 5-arch bridge, for those people that might be watching this someday, there's thousands of people that see the picture of the 5-arch stone bridge, but they don't know where it's at. And if you go where Shopier Road goes over I-90, and you go straight east, 3 miles exactly, you look at the tree line on the creek to your left, and that's where the stone bridge is. And I'm working with the county on a project of opening that up, so that it'd be visible. And I know the city of Beloit Tourism would really like that, because then that way it'd be an easy direction to get at. So,
It'd be a beautiful view,
yeah.
you know, from across from your place,
Yeah.
if you could drive up through there and have that
Right.
open, it'd really be nice.
Well, about 10 years ago, because I was involved, Leonard Hoff and myself and 2 other guys from the county, we cleaned out the other side.
Right.
We got the okay to do that, but then they would never let us go back in and keep it down like it should have been.
Right.
It's starting to go up again, and it's too bad. It should be kept.
Yeah,
Kept open.
and that limestone, because you talk about the gravel for I-90, but the limestone of the 5 Arch Bridge actually came from up by Waupon.
Yeah.
Mhm.
They hauled that was always quite interesting and stuff like that, so. Well, I think that this has been very interesting, and we think each and every one of you, the last story I want to tell, and, well, I'll ask each one of you, when you started your job, where did you first work? Say, when you were 20 years old, what was your job when you were 20 years old?
My job, I was farming for myself, down on Nice Farm, down on County W, then. It's 67 now.
John?
When I was 20 years old, I went to work at Warner Electric Brake in South Beloit. Then, just a beehive of activity. It just, to this day, we were so busy, it's just unbelievable how long and hard we worked at that. And today, that building is empty, and the downsized several times, sold several times. And sometimes it's just hard to believe.
Yeah. Chuck, where did you work when you were 18, 20 years old?
I went into service at 18. In fact, lacking 2 weeks of being 18, I went into service, and then when I got out of the service, I went to Durst Corp over there, right next door to the home, and I stayed there for about 8 years, and then I moved on to other things.
Okay. What year was that you came out of service?
58.
1958? Ed, where did you work when you were 18, 20 years old?
I started working when I was 16 at Woodard Governor in Rockford.
Okay.
I walked out of Clinton High School, and jumped in my mother's hot Oldsmobile 88 and drove down there and got a job.
Very good. Gene, yourself, 18, 20 years old?
Well, let's see, at that time, I guess my first factory job was, I worked at Harvard down in, for Admiral TV for
A lot
few
of them
months.
started there.
Yeah.
A lot of kids went to start out
And
there.
then, I drove truck, hauled gravel and stuff out of the pit up here for the last in black dirt for Shopper Road, for I-90, where the ramps go down, filled that in. Then, I worked at Gardner Machine Company. Worked a little bit at Durst, finally wound up at Chevy.
Okay. I'm going to help Ethel a little bit. If you go to the Sundown Cafe in Clinton, they have a picture on the wall, dirt downtown, and I was sitting there and I looked at the sign and said Ethel's Beauty Shop. So on the walk back to the company, I popped my head in and I said to Ethel, I said, Ethel, did you have an aunt or relative? Because there's an Ethel's Beauty Shop right where this one was. And she said to me, she says, guess when I started cutting hair? And I said to her, I said, because I was kind of thinking 50 or something like that, but what year did you tell me you started cutting hair in Clinton there?
Well, I went to beauty school and I got out in 36, and I worked for about a year and a half at Clinton Beauty Shop that Bill Wolfram had. And then I started in the fall of 38 for myself. And I'm still working at
And
it.
what's so impressive is that today, which we didn't tell the date earlier, at the end we should, that today is December 14th. 13th, 2007. And the reason why we were meeting today on Thursday is because it's Ethel's day off. So,
Thanks there, Dan.
you bet, you bet. Keep going to work. Keep going to work.
Keep the road open, huh?
There you go.
That's great.
Fran,
Uh,
when you were 18, 20 years old, what,
oh, when I was 20 years old, I was raising a family.
okay,
I had went to work at the telephone company, and then when I got married and started a family, a year after my son was born, we moved out here, and I sort of took care of everybody's kids. Yeah, and then when kids got grown enough to take care of themselves, I went to work at the store. And that was just great. And Marge and Andy were just the greatest people to work for. And then you, of course, get to know everybody in the community.
right. Annie's Cafe is where the Chauffeur store is right now. And that was my first job,
Was it?
was for Andy Kopp, 9
Yeah.
years, 10 years old.
Yeah.
He'd get you a sandwich or a malt. And
Yeah.
you'd put bread on the shelves or you'd fill the people's cars with gas. Remember the day I quit, when some old guy came in and I said, regular or premium? And he said, fill it with Ethel. And I said, there was like regular premium, and he said, fill it with Ethel. And after the third time, there was my bike and I went home. You know?
That reminds me of Jim Craw. And he came in, and I went out to fill up this tank with gas, and he said, have you met this lady that I've been running around with? And I thought, Jim Craw?
You mean young Jim, not old Jim?
Huh? Old Jim.
Old Jim.
Old
huh?
Jim.
Yeah, okay.
And I said, no. Well, he said, you got to come around here and meet her. He said, she's just a wonderful gal. It was his wife. You're quite a storyteller.
You know, Dan, I didn't know you were talking about, I thought you meant your first full-time job.
Oh,
See, I could go way back, from the time I was practically big enough to walk, I was over at Durst doing something, for a nickel or dime or something. And then I actually went full-time when I was 16 for 2H farms. And where Dick's dad at that time lived on one of them Blackhawk farms, and 2H was running them. And so I got to work with Dick's dad back in them days, and there was a good, hard worker, great man, and he was the old hand corn husking competitions he used to have, he was champion of that.
actually,
Won
Dick,
he was.
Dick Vandergeese, who had hoped to have made it today to talk on the railroad, because he's really done a lot of research on the railroad, but he was looking forward to coming, because he had an article he wanted to give the Dick Post, that his dad won corn husking back in 1930, won that.
I've got that book, it was a farm paper magazine that came out one time, somewhere's at home, I've got that book yet, there were the article about his dad's in there.
About 1940 or 41.
Yeah, something like that.
I got two of them.
It
It was Prairie Farmer, and I think there was 2 pages on it.
That was big in the fall of the year. Everybody had to go watch Dick, man.
Yeah.
Who keeps all these archives now? You, Dick?
Of what?
Anything?
You want some more?
I've got a lot of history that I collected. I've got a lot of stuff that I bought across the state line in auctions that had to do with the town of Turtle.
I got a plat book from
Different articles, I mean,
1856.
just paper that didn't
About this
count
thick.
anything.
Well, a gal that's really done a lot of history in the Clinton, Chauffeur, Turtle area on history, and she knows about what's going on today, and she's hoping to work with Mike Powers, but that's Joyce Splan, and Ron Splan's wife.
Splan's wife, okay.
And so we're hoping to put this together and then work with her on some pictures to go with this, and
I didn't know she was that interested.
yeah, it'll be very good, so. But, well, I'll go around back of Ethel. Betty, could you tell, we forgot to talk about what you did when you were
Well,
18, 20 years old.
I went to work at Fairbanks Morse when I was 16, and then I got married when I was 17. So then after my kids got a little older, I went back to Fairbanks for 6 years, and then I worked at Vesely Wells in South Beloit for 28 years, and that's it.
Wow.
Been retired for 20 years.
That's a good, long history of work.
Yeah, Yeah. Well, that's going to conclude. We hope to do this again. I know that when I talk to a lot of people from the community about bringing the prestigious people together and talk about the history of Turtle and Chopier, a lot of people referred to the fact that if we could have done this in the past and had Andy Kopp and Walt Durst and Bob Nolan and Chuck Fensky, people like that. So unless somebody has something else to conclude with.
We have a couple others that I'm sure there's probably many out there, but that I
Like Fred
thought of
Clemens?
that there's certain times that they grew up, there's always a generation ahead or
Right.
someone else or behind, is Ralph Carlson and
Sure.
and Mark Baca.
Oh, Mark Bach.
They were good friends with their brother Buck, we call him Harold,
Yeah.
and if he lived here, there'd be another one. 'Cause he always liked to tell a story about me.
Well, there are a lot of stories.
Their
about
brother, Fran and Betty's brother, Buck always talked about my first haircut, which is right across the street from the Con Church there. And I don't know how old I was, 2, 3 or whatever, but anyway, or maybe not even that old, that Irene Van Ness was doing the haircutting, and all I'd done was bawl. She brought this big yellow cat out, and Buck said it didn't help a bit. I kept right on screaming.
Yeah.
But every time he sees me, he brings that up, that haircut.
Well, very good. And again, today the date is December 13th, 2007. So we hope to get a group again together, and we support the history of the town. Thank you.